Perfect.
So, are working?
Yes. Perfect.
Cool.
You're supposed to unmute him as well then.
Yeah, Laurence, you've muted somehow.
Oh, okay.
No, now we're hearing. Now we're hearing. Right.
Excellent. I know that I am mortal and that my days are numbered, but when I follow in my mind the many intertwined orbits of the stars, I no longer touch the earth with my feet. At the table of Zeus himself, I am nourished by ambrosia, the food of the gods. I'm an amateur geogeek, and I want to share with you my fascination with the original geogeek from the 2nd century AD, Claudius Ptolemy of Alexandria. That's the great city founded by Alexander the Great, the city of Cleopatra, at the western tip of the Nile Delta. By Ptolemy's time, the dynasty of the Ptolemies, no relation, was over with Cleopatra's suicide. Alexandria was firmly part of the Roman Empire, and its 500,000 inhabitants made it second only to Rome. It was perhaps even more cosmopolitan than Rome, with traders from all over the Mediterranean, Britain, Arabia, and India mingling in the docks. By the way, the Emperor Trajan had recently restored the Pharaoh's Canal, linking the Nile with the Red Sea, meaning a maritime route from Rome to India was possible. Who needs the Suez Canal? Visitors would have gazed in awe at the palace, the theatre, the hippodrome, the tomb of Alexander, the vast warehouses, and the lighthouse over 100 meters tall, an actual wonder of the world. Maybe a great cargo ship full of grain would set off to feed Rome. What a place for a geographer to live. We can assume Ptolemy would have worked in the scientific research institute known as the Museum, with its adjacent library, with possibly 700,000 books. As a Greek mathematician there, he'd be following such alumni as Euclid, Archimedes, and Eratosthenes. He wrote on optics and music, but his 3 great works are on astronomy, astrology, and geography. Let's start with his astronomy, the Almagest. There's masses to be said about the Almagest, or the mathematical treatise, to give it its Greek title. But alas, I don't have time or expertise to get into detail. In summary, it's a single work on astronomy from the ancient world whose account of planetary movements was scientifically accepted until Copernicus and Kepler, so until the 17th century. There's a table of chords or signs to get us going. There's a database of all 1,022 visible stars, for each one noting its position in the sky, its celestial latitude and longitude, its apparent magnitude from 1 to 6, and which constellation it's in. He describes the Earth as the innermost in a system of concentric spheres. The outermost sphere holds the fixed stars, and then he describes the 7 inner spheres of the wandering stars, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and the deviations of each from the perfect sphere. Because of the geocentric model, he must account for retrograde movements when planets appear to move the wrong way in the sky. And the trigonometry gets quite complex, but it's pretty darn accurate. He explains how to construct an astrolabe too. Ptolemy wasn't the first to compile a catalogue of stars, but this was the most comprehensive and has several improvements over his main source, Copernicus. That image there is from Encyclopedia Britannica, but it shows the motions of Venus and Mercury in those crazy spirals as seen from the Earth at the center. But nobody had yet compiled a mathematical list of the city positions on Earth, so the innermost sphere, latitudes and longitudes on that smallest sphere that Ptolemy knew was tiny in comparison to the other spheres. So paradoxically, the smallest of the spheres was the most difficult to model mathematically. But I'll cover those locations of cities on Earth in my next book, he writes. That is the geography. So what is it? It's not entirely an original work. How could it be? What is it? It's a discussion about compiling geographic data. It's about drawing regional maps, and it's about drawing world maps, including projections. It's a database of 8,000 places. Here's a database produced in Germany about 15 years ago. So 8,000 places, each one with a latitude, longitude, and that was by analogy with astronomy, where latitude and longitude came first. You can see here that row 5,714 is Alexandria, 31 degrees north from the equator, 60 degrees 30 minutes east from the Canary Isles, which was his base meridian. It consisted of a manuscript of 8 scrolls, text with a few diagrams. It was deposited in the library, almost certainly, intended to be copied. His primary source is someone who lived probably only a few decades earlier, Marinos of Tyre in modern Lebanon. Marinos compiled much material from itineraries on land and sea, travelers' tales, the work of geographic writers, including Strabo. Marinos knew to be careful of some sources. Merchants magnified distances, he wrote. He proposed an equirectangular projection based on Rhodes, which is at 36 degrees north, and that gives a ratio of 5 to 4 between longitude and latitude. Ptolemy complains about this method. It doesn't give an impression of a curved globe. He does in fact use equirectangular for regional maps, but correctly adjusts the ratio according to the latitude. Whatever Marinos says about merchants, it's fun to imagine Ptolemy chatting with sailors down at the port, running ideas by them about where exactly the cities in the world are. Ptolemy also complains about Marinos's data compilation. For example, he writes, one has to have the position in longitude and latitude for each locality that is to be marked if one is to place it where it belongs. But this cannot be found directly in Marinos's compilations. Rather, one finds separately in one place, maybe just the latitudes, say in the section on the setting out of the parallels, and in some other place, just the longitudes, say in the section on inscribing the meridians. What's more, the same localities are not found in each section. The parallels are drawn through some places, the meridians through others. He discusses the importance of recording everything as text, and this is quoting from Ptolemy, continually transferring a map from earlier exemplars to subsequent ones tends to bring about grave distortions in the transcriptions through gradual changes. He knew that text, a kind of digitization, was the way to get reliable transmission. He proposes a set of 26 regional maps, all north aligned, based on the data. He does not specify the medium, but I believe they would be most likely painted on the walls of a large room. So let's take a look at some regional maps. You just saw Britain there with its distinctive kink. Here's Italy, somewhat stretched east-west. Here's Greece. And I showed the Egyptian map earlier in a modern rendering, but here's a 1478 edition printed in Rome. There's Alexandria with the red arrow. And if we zoom in, we can see how beautifully typeset it is. We can also see that thing marked Trajanus Fluvius, Trajan's river, marking the Pharaoh's canal that Trajan had restored in the 2nd century, just before Ptolemy would have created this. So those were some of the 26 regional maps. Let's get to the world maps now. Now, after a paragraph describing how to plot locations on globes, it's basically easy, Ptolemy gets to his main project. Note that the full Greek title is Geographiki Hyphagesis, which means Manual for Drawing a World Map, or maybe just how to draw the world. He proposes 3 different projections to the plane in increasing order of mathematical complexity. His first projection has straight meridians and curved parallels. The maths is pretty easy for this one, says Ptolemy. That's a 1478 printed edition. Second projection has curved meridians as well as curved parallels, and it thus avoids the sharp break at the equator. It gives a better impression of a globe, and yet it's still relatively easy to draw, but it's recommended to use this one, Ptolemy says, if you can deal with the maths. That's a 1482 printed edition in Ulm. Then his third projection is the most amazing of all. It involves several diagrams where he builds up the complexity of it. And as you look at a diagram on the right, you might say, what the hell is that? Is that perspective? And it's very interesting. Its construction does indeed involve circles in genuine perspective. They're ellipses. Yet the result on the right is not in perspective. What's going on? Now, I think Ptolemy knew that a genuine perspective globe, so that's what a world map would look like on that projection. You notice how the meridians are still roughly equally spaced, unlike a perspective projection. And those two projections, they're not actually very good as world maps. And I suspect that Ptolemy knew this. So he knew he couldn't use real perspective for his world map. He had to pretend that it was perspective. He was giving an illusion of the globe, but distorting his projection so that it was still useful as a map. A little tangent on classical globes. Did they use globes? Absolutely they did. There's lots of statues of Urania, the goddess of astronomy, like this one on the left. There's a painting found in Pompeii on the right, showing a globe in somebody's house. This is known as the Farnese Atlas, again from Ptolemy's time, based on an earlier model. Actually, you can find this in Naples. That's about 60 centimeters across, I think. So that's a celestial globe showing the constellations. I wonder though, what about concave globes? Have they been neglected? These two architectural drawings in this image here show the Pantheon in Rome and the Temple of Venus and Rome, also in Rome. And that first one, you've maybe seen this kind of diagram before. A 43-meter diameter sphere fits perfectly inside the Pantheon. Just imagine the interior being painted with a celestial or even a terrestrial globe. That's Pantheon again on the left. On the right, we've got the Temple of Venus and Rome that you can visit today. Look at that quarter sphere at the top there. Just imagine that. The quarter of the sphere is all you needed to represent in the 2nd century AD. That's the only part of the world they knew about. What about putting that there? I don't have any evidence for this. It's just a nice conjecture, it seems to me. What did Ptolemy get wrong? I'm going to skip over these because of all this amazing stuff he gets right. There's too much labor on what he got wrong, I think. But he underestimated the size of the Earth. He took Hipparchus's guess rather than Eratosthenes, which was unfortunate. And he didn't really have enough latitude data. You'd think latitude being pretty easy to measure, just put a stick in the Earth and measure the shadow at Midsummer's Day. You'd have thought that was fairly easy to collect, but particularly for India, if you look at his map of India, it hardly goes south at all it's hardly a peninsula at all. So that was seems a shame. I'm going to mention now his astrological work, Tetrabiblos. This is probably written between the Almagest and the geography, and it's quite a curious thing in relation to them. Ptolemy warns his readers at the start that astrology is not an exact science like mathematical astronomy or even geography. It's as if he's saying, here are some initial assumptions you might reasonably make, but they may not work in your particular case. And he ends the work with similar caveats. And yet there was tons of interest in the 1st and 2nd centuries in astrology. Caesar's star was seen to rise into the heavens upon his assassination. The Emperor Augustus promoted himself as a Capricorn, the Star of Bethlehem, and there were severe punishments for astrologers who got their predictions wrong. So in the Tetrabiblos, there's masses of detail on human fates, inclinations, desires, sexual orientations, depending where you live in the world, good and bad health, propitious times for action, all influenced by the stars. There's even a section on monsters. Here's a list of contents. Monsters is about halfway down on the right page there. On geography, he investigates ethnic differences between the people of the Earth by considering the influential zodiac signs on their region. So by giving if you have a base meridian on the Canary Isles, you have a base meridian in the sky, you align those, then you get dominant zodiacs for particular regions. So he's directly relating celestial lat long to geographical lat long. Here's a quote about the people of Syria and Commagene and Cappadocia. They're familiar to Scorpio and Mars, therefore much boldness, knavery, treachery, and laboriousness are found among them. The people of Lydia, Cilicia, and Pamphylia have familiarity with Pisces and Jupiter. These accordingly are more wealthy, commercial, social, free, and trustworthy. And there's a lot about sexual habits. There's some crazy, amazing stuff. So given the change in style, I can't help wondering if Ptolemy's heart wasn't really in this work as it was in the Almagest and the geography. I like to think of it as a kind of research grant application for the geography. Give me the money and I'll compile that list of city coordinates you've always wanted to fix astrology. Hey, Plutarch, over there in your Temple of Apollo in Delphi, how about you invest some of your gold in the latest mathematical model and maybe some computers to go with it that will improve prediction accuracy dramatically. Back to the geography. How does it come down to us? Unfortunately, not much discussion survives from the ancient world about it, which is a great shame. There's a little mention of it by Cassiodorus in the south of Italy in around 550 AD. He says you have the Codex of Ptolemy, which sets out all localities so clearly that you would almost conclude that he was an inhabitant of all the regions. Then there's a bit of a gap, some signs of it in Islamic science. And then there's, I've put in this little timeline here, some historical events in italics and some appearances of the geography in bold. So the 1280s, we get those amazing maps start to emerge called the Portolan charts. They're amazingly, start to get really recognizable maps of the Mediterranean. So almost the same time, the geography is rediscovered by a guy called Maximos Planudes in Constantinople, in a time of immense turmoil in the Byzantine Empire. They've only just recovered their capital from the Venetians who crazily sacked it in 1204. But anyway, he does an amazing job of rescuing manuscripts, and he's delighted to find the manuscript of the geography. He says, I never saw anything so skillful, colourful, and elegant as this lovely Geographia. This work lay hidden for centuries and found no one to bring it to light. Then about 100 years later, there's an Italian who goes to Constantinople, Jacopo Angelo. He translates the geography into Latin. So that brings it into the West, brings it into the attention of the humanists in northern Italy for the first time. They had very bizarre maps until then that may have come down from copy after copy after copy, after text after copy of ancient maps. We don't really know where those other medieval maps came from. It's sort of just in time that these maps started getting copied in Italy because Constantinople falls to the Turks in 1453. 2 years later, printing's invented by Gutenberg, and there starts to be the idea we should print these maps, so that print this work. So that starts to happen in Italy. First Vicenza without maps, then a really serious project is underway in Rome with some very talented printers and geographers, but they're picked to the post probably by industrial espionage by some guys in Bologna, which is a real shame. So 1478 is the first good edition, and it was so good that Columbus had a copy of that edition. Then there's the 1482 edition that I showed you earlier, the world map. So this is all around the time of Columbus. 1507, there's the famous Waldseemüller world map, which you probably know. How is that related to Ptolemy? If you think about just those two central sections, this really is a Ptolemaic world map. This is straight out of Ptolemy. India there is a little stub on the right. Italy kinked upwards. The top of Britain kinked over as well. So it really is a kind of expansion into that heart shape for the whole world, and now covering Southern Africa as well. So Ptolemy's still there. And by the way, that's his portrait in the left there, along with Amerigo Vespucci on the right. So if you want a copy of one of these things, they're fairly expensive. So if you just want the world map of that Bologna edition, it's 210,000 euros in 2009. They only come up for sale once in a generation anyway. These are very expensive. So I could only afford the one on the right, the Basel edition. And I didn't pay £47,000 for it. Luckily, I paid only 100 quid for it, because once the maps have been ripped out of these things, they're practically worthless, even though they're beautiful things. And I think Ptolemy would still respect them and say that's fine. The maps weren't really the point. The maps were designed for drawing on walls. So I have this lovely thing. You can turn my camera's on. There it is. So that cost me 100 quid, and I think it's quite a bargain. So you can access these things in facsimile, of course, normally, or in libraries, or if you're lucky, get something real. So there was then another long gap after Maceas's edition of 1578, a long gap until the 19th century, when there are several editions published by Germans. Only one of them gets completed by Nobbe in 1845, and that was then the only one you could use until the year 2000. Quite amazing. There was no real edition of Ptolemy for 155 years. And actually that one wasn't complete. The first complete one was that 2006 one, that German one again. So there's been an amazing dearth of actual useful editions of Ptolemy. So I mentioned here so I show here the three modern editions. And the two that are worth looking at are the two on the right. The one on the left, you will make any Ptolemy scholar cringe if you say you've bought that one. It was produced in 1932 from a Renaissance Latin translation, so it didn't go back to the Greek. If you want some fun, read the review by Aubrey Diller of that 1932 edition. It's, I don't think ever has a academic work been so disemboweled by a colleague. It's hilarious. The middle one in English, it's a fantastic thing. The full theoretical text, lots of diagrams, but not many maps, and only a portion of the coordinate data. The one on the right so that's fine if you speak German or ancient Greek, but it's not in English, unfortunately. But otherwise, it's a fantastic edition with a full set of maps and the entire data, and a CD with a database. So it is a scandal to me that no complete version of Ptolemy's geography is available in English. If you know of any geophilanthropists, I think geoposterity will be eternally grateful if one happens. Scandal number two, there is no openly licensed database of the coordinates in Ptolemy's geography. I really couldn't find one. I was amazed. The data in the German edition, it sort of says, yeah, you can use it for free, but don't publish it. This kind of old style freebie license. So I decided I would make a start. I've tentatively called it OpenStreetMap Classic. And I've started typing in the coordinates from my 1540 edition. And so there it is. I made it public today. There's only 100 or so coordinates in it so far. So it's very much a work in progress, but it's a start, and it's got a free license. It's got a proper Libre license on it. So what would Ptolemy's verdict have been? I think he'd have been impressed and dismayed in equal measure, impressed that his work lasted so long. His digitization project of turning the world into text lasted intact for 1,350 years until it could finally be regarded as historical. I think he'd be frustrated. He trusted Hipparchus over Eratosthenes on the size of the earth. I think the scientist in him would be dismayed that his work wasn't treated more like a GitHub repo, its issues addressed by later researchers, taking pull requests from new projections and so on. The astrological angle, I think even allowing for the Tetrabiblos, the geography isn't entirely free of it, which indicates that he's either lost interest or he wasn't that interested in the first place. He's writing for a readership he assumes exists, which is the purely scientific reader. I like to think of it, he was in so deep that even if he started out as an astrologer, the geography became an end in itself, and he was doing it for its own sake. So this has been a tourist guide to Ptolemy's world. I hope it's whetted your appetite to dive into the real deal, the Bergman and Jones English edition and the Struckerberger Grasshoff German edition. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laurence. That was fantastic. So let me unmute everyone. So first of all, we can clap. So let's show our appreciation to Laurence. We do have a few questions here, Laurence. Let me find you so I can unmute you.
Cool.
So the first question is, there seems to be remote speculation that both Aristotle and Diodorus mention the Americas in their work. Did Ptolemy ever hint at the existence of the Americas?
I don't, it's not in Ptolemy's geography. I don't think it's in any other work. In some medieval maps, you do see Brazil, a little island, tiny island, just off the coast of Ireland, which is curious. And that gets involved with a mythology around St. Patrick, I think. But no, I don't think it's mentioned. There is an implication, though, that each quarter of the globe should be symmetrical. So there should be a southern hemisphere.
If there's a north, there should be a south.
Yeah, so there should be a landmass in the southern hemisphere, just like Eurasia in the northern eastern hemisphere. And again, there were other. I don't think Ptolemy, though, was talked about this. He didn't speculate that much about that kind of thing. I think that was more later medieval scholars.
Let's move to a more serious topic, Laurence, which was brought by Sam. And so if we view this as the foundation of modern geography, let's settle it once and for all. I mean, who is it? Longitude, latitude, or latitude, longitude? How did he do it? I mean, come on. What was the,
I believe latitude has always been specified first. I think because it's easy. That's the fundamental thing about latitude. And also it relates so nicely. You can just look where the pole star is, measure it on a protractor. That's your latitude. It's easy in at night, and it's easy in the day. It's
okay. We have one final question. The places of interest database that you mentioned. He says
the one I've just started. Do you mean?
Well, so your database. What is the licensing on that database? Is that open source? I mean, it's public domain, or what's the?
Yeah, I'll make it as open as it can be. I started as a bit of a joke, to be honest, but I actually think there really should be an open access database of the coordinates. So this will, if I actually do it, it'll be the data from this particular edition, which probably has a few mistakes, but in a sense, that's still worth doing, I think. In the same way that people love to type in every single text of every edition of the Bible that has ever been printed. I don't see why the geography should be considered as less important than the Bible in that respect, in terms of cataloging and digitizing every single edition we know about. It's not as if there's 1,000 editions. There's 100 or so.
Okay.
And then they would be there for future researchers to plot maps from, to analyze, to see which text came from which other text, this kind of thing.
One final question just came in, Laurence, and that what is your own background? You're a geographer, you're a historian. What is your own?
I kind of forgot to mention that I'm actually a font technology by profession,
Obviously.
but I've always had a fascination with maps and been involved with OpenStreetMap for, well, I got involved quite heavily in the 2005-6. That's taken a bit of a backseat now, but yeah, always loved geogeekery and the history of maps as well. But yeah, fonts is my day job.
Well, yeah, you can't beat the excitement of fonts. So,